Europe made a mistake with Turkey. Now it's paying the price. For years, Europe treated Turkey like a problem to manage rather than a partner to respect, useful when needed, ignored when convenient. Accession talks froze, trust collapsed, and serious strategy was replaced by the lectures and paperwork. Now, reality is catching up. Europe is discovering that without Turkey, many of its biggest challenges become not just harder, but unmanageable. On security, containing Russia as the United States pulls back and leaves a massive gap in Europe's defense. On energy, navigating a permanent crisis where Turkey serves as the main corridor for oil and gas from the Middle East and soon from the Eastern Mediterranean. And on migration, preventing millions of people from conflict zones in the Middle East from spilling into Europe. And Turkey isn't waiting around anymore. It's building leverage, expanding its reach, and shaping outcomes on its own terms. This is the moment Turkey enters its most consequential decade in modern history. Let's break it all down. To understand where Turkey is now, we need to understand where it's been. Because for nearly 50 years, Turkey has been operating under some of the heaviest constraints any modern nation has faced. Since the late 1970s, Turkey has been locked in an internal war against the PKK, a terrorist organization operating not just within Turkey, but across Syria, Iraq, and Iran. This wasn't a small insurgency. This was a wave, a generational conflict that consumed an enormous amount of political capital, military resources, and economic strength. At the same time, Turkey's political system was fragile. Military coups disrupted democratic governance repeatedly through the post-Cold War II era. Institutions weakened. Long-term strategic planning became almost impossible when the government itself could be overthrown. And then there is the neighborhood. Turkey has rarely known peace on its border. The Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s and 90s, the US invasion of Iraq, the Arab uprising, Syria and Iraq collapsing into chaos, the rise of ISIS, the Assad regime's brutality, and the constant threat of Kurdish autonomous zones in northern Syria that could embolden separatism within Turkey itself. For most countries, any of these would be a crisis. Turkey faced all of them simultaneously, and yet it endured. Now here is where things get interesting. As of 2026, almost everything has changed. Let's start with Syria. After years of chaos, Syria has been reunified under a Turkey support and Turkish-friendly leadership following the removal of Assad regime. For the first time in decades, Turkey's southern border is no longer an existential security threat. The PKK dissolved, the YPG threat from Syria effectively ended. These aren't minor developments. These are tectonic shifts in Turkey's security environment. Regionally, Turkey has rebuilt and strengthened alliances with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Egypt. This is a foundation of a new cooperative bloc aimed at creating a more stable and peaceful Middle East, with Turkey playing a central coordinating role. Internally, Turkey has turned a corner economically. After years of financial crisis, inflation has fallen sharply. Financial stability slowly is returning. Foreign investment is coming back. Economic confidence is recovering faster than most analysts expected. But here is the real game changer: Turkey's defense industry. This is where Turkey has genuinely leapfrogged into the big leagues. Turkish unmanned aerial systems, drones, now control over 70% of the global UCAV export market. 70%. Countries from Asia, Africa to Eastern Europe and the Middle East are buying Turkish drones because they work, they are affordable, and they don't come with the political string attached to American or European systems. And it's not just drones. Turkey has achieved near total domestic production capacity across key military platforms. The Steel Dome air defense systems, the Khan 5th generation fighter jet, one of the only a handful of countries in the world developing this level of technology. This isn't a country asking for permission anymore. This is a country building its own power. Now all of this is happening against a backdrop that makes Turkey even more important, the end of the unipolar world. For about 20 years after the Cold War, the United States was the undisputed global superpower. But that era is over. We are now in a multipolar world where power is fragmented, negotiated, and contested. China has emerged as a counterweight to the US. Europe and America are no longer strategically aligned the way they used to. And with Donald Trump back in power, the transatlantic relationship is more transactional than ever. In this environment, Turkey has become something extremely rare, a country that can talk to everyone. Turkey in the center, lines connecting to Washington, Moscow, Beijing, Brussels, Tehran, Riyadh. Turkey is in NATO, but it also talks to Russia. It cooperates with the West, but it maintains relationship with China. It's a regional power in the Middle East, but it's also a bridge to Europe. There are very few countries on earth that can operate across these divides. Turkey is one of them, and that makes it indispensable. Let's talk about Europe specifically, because Europe is finally waking up to a hard truth. It needs Turkey more than Turkey needs Europe. Energy. Europe is desperately trying to diversify away from Russian gas. Many of those alternative routes from Caucasus, from the Eastern Mediterranean run through Turkey. Migration. Europe's entire migration management strategy depends on Turkey controlling its borders and hosting millions of Syrian refugees. Without Turkey's cooperation, that system collapses. Supply chains. As Europe tries to de-risk from China, it needs alternative manufacturing and logistics hub. Turkey is perfectly positioned as a bridge between Asia and Europe. Defense. Turkey has NATO's second largest army. It controls access to the Black Sea. It's a frontline state in multiple theaters, from the Ukraine war to Black Sea, Caucasus, Balkans, Middle East, and Eastern Mediterranean. For years, Europe could afford to treat Turkey as optional, as a difficult partner that could be managed at arm's length. That era is over. Europe's energy, security, migration policy, defense posture, and economic resilience are all deeply tied to Turkish cooperation, and Turkey knows it now. So here's the big question. What does this mean for the next decade? Turkey is entering one of the most promising periods in its modern history. And investing in Turkey right now, whether in business, in stock market, or in real estate, isn't emotional optimism. It's a rational strategic calculation. Security threats diminished, regional allies strengthened, economic stability returning, defense industry world-class, geopolitical leverage maximized. Think about it. Turkey has resolved or dramatically reduced its major security threats. It strengthened regional alliance, its economy is stabilizing, its defense industry is booming, and its geopolitical leverage has never been higher. Over the next decade, Turkey may not be at the absolute center of the global system, but it will occupy one of its most critical junctions. And that's exactly where you want to be in a multipolar world. Europe spent decades treating Turkey as a peripheral partner, a country that was useful but ultimately optional. Geography and history have now forced a reckoning. Turkey isn't peripheral anymore, it's central, and Europe is only now beginning to admit what should have been obvious all along. The question isn't whether Turkey matters, it's whether Europe will recognize it in time or whether it will learn the hard way. If you found this analysis valuable, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the geopolitics shaping our world. Drop a comment and let me know, do you think Turkey's rise is sustainable, or are these risks we're not seeing? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.